You're listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. For I Will Be With You. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible.
Welcome back to the For I Will Be With You podcast for the 33rd week of the year, going from Leviticus 26:1 to Leviticus 26:19, and from August 12th to August 18th. Leviticus 26:1 and 2 says, "You shall not make idols for yourselves, and you shall not erect for yourselves a statue or pillar, and in your hand not in place a flooring stone, upon which to prostrate oneself. For I am God, your God. My Sabbaths shall you observe, and my sanctuary shall you revere. I am God." So these two verses warn us not to succumb to the temptation of idolatry. And this is the conclusion of a section of the Torah that instructs the Israelites to observe the sabbatical year, the seventh year, when you give the land a rest and when you don't lend money to the poor at interest. So these are difficult commandments to follow, and the lure of idolatry will be strong in the face of these tests of faith, because as we said last week, not planting your fields for a year actually means having to grow enough food in the sixth year to last for 3 years, to feed you in the sixth year, the seventh year when you're not planting, and in the eighth year when you're waiting for the harvest. It takes a lot of faith, and it's challenging, and it may be tempting to turn to idol worship in order to get you through it. But this is what it's like to be sober. Sobriety is a similar test. Being sober might mean turning your normal, quote-unquote, life upside down. If you were selfish when you were using, you're going to have to be more selfless in sobriety. And it won't feel natural, at least not at first. The temptation may be to turn to modern idols, our modern idols of money, property, prestige, and ego, and the related behavior of exploiting those who are vulnerable may also come up. If you turn to these idols, you're going to be distancing yourself from the true God, your higher power, which will help keep you sober. Leviticus 26:3 and 4 says, "If you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them, then I will provide rains in their time, and the land will give its produce, and the tree of the field will give its fruit." So remember, this comment is coming from God to the Israelites when they are still in the wilderness. They have not yet entered the land of Israel, so they have not yet begun to live as free people in their own agrarian society where they're going to grow their own food. They've been slaves, and now in the wilderness they're getting manna from heaven. They're getting basically free food. So they haven't yet actually begun to farm their own land. So they're being told, if you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them, I will provide rain, and the land will give its produce. So God is telling the Israelites to follow his law when they live in the promised land that God is giving to them, and they'll reap a bountiful harvest. And in our own lives, we should find that we are rewarded spiritually and materially by following God's laws. And it may not seem that way, of course, because God is not a push-button machine for satisfaction. Sometimes things don't work out the way we think they should. But I think it's important to have faith that God will reward us with the experiences that we need to have. But ultimately this is true because AA is a simple program. Don't drink and work the steps and you're going to be okay. That is generally true. You may not become rich. You may not have the wild fantasy life of your dreams, but your life is going to be okay, certainly compared to when you were drinking. And it may be challenging to accept the idea that God is rewarding us for our devotion. It may not be what we expect, but it'll be good for us. Sometimes God surprises us with rewards that we didn't realize we needed. That's always interesting when we get a reward that at first we don't know why something has come into our life, but then as we focus on it, we can see maybe there was a reason for it. Just coming back to this verse where it says, if you will follow my decrees and observe my commandments and perform them. We have some verbal repetition here. The verse says, follow, observe, and perform. Now, aren't these all the same thing? Yes and no. So as we've said before, when there's a confusing thing like that with seeming repetition of words, if we work from the assumption that the Bible doesn't have unnecessary wording, there's an interpretation that the word following refers to studying the law. You have to study the law, the biblical law, to understand them, and then you can observe them. But actually performing them is really a separate step. So it's really, you have to learn them, you have to follow them, you have to learn them, you have to pay attention to them, and you have to perform them. It takes all three to really be in complete conscious contact with your higher power. And in AA, it's very much the same. It's one thing to know the program. It's another thing to do the program. And certainly, as we've seen, unfortunately, there are people in and out of the rooms who know the program. They know the big book. They know the steps, but they don't follow them. You have to connect thought with action. Desire to change is not the same as changing. It takes strength to put ideas into action. In Leviticus 26:6, God says, I will provide peace in the land, and you will lie down with none to frighten you. So when God says you will lie down with none to frighten you, it refers to sleeping in a peaceful state of mind. Now this might seem trivial. God wants us to sleep well? Yes, I'm sure God wants us to sleep well, but that's not really what this is about. If you've ever experienced anxiety and depression, and I feel like I don't even have to ask that question in this context. Has anybody not experienced anxiety and depression as an alcoholic addict? You'll know that there's a loss of good quality sleep that inevitably comes with that, and you'll understand what it means to seek peaceful sleep. You know, having been through it myself, I will tell you it's probably the thing you want the most, but often it's the hardest thing to find. It's one of these essential health issues that we all face. Sleeping affects our entire body, our whole outlook on life. It's a great test of serenity, though. If we go to bed with worries on our mind, with resentments held inside, anger building, and that kind of thing, we won't sleep right. We will feel it the next day and probably feel worse. So we need to work on turning all that over. We need to release ourselves from the grip that anger and resentment have over us. And God can help. If we follow in God's ways, God can grant us the serenity we need to help us sleep well. Some people like to do a nightly process of turning things over to God before they go to bed. This can help, though some people I know in recovery actually say if you have to wait until bedtime to turn things over, you've probably held on to them for too long during that day. Leviticus 26:8 continues this expression from God of what will happen if the Israelites follow the commandments. It says, 26:8 says, 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 of you will pursue 10,000, and your enemies will fall before you by the sword. So at this moment, the Israelites are on the verge of entering the land of Canaan to conquer the land from its inhabitants, from the Canaanites, the Philistines, and others. And there's going to be war after that as well, because as we know from history that the wars fought by the Israelites didn't end when they conquered the land. They continued on. So there's a military threat. So God is promising the Israelites great military strength if they follow in his ways and obey his laws. Now, whether or not you believe in military might, we're going to just say for the sake of argument that we believe in it. This idea is still compelling. If you seek conscious contact with a higher power, you'll be rewarded with strength to beat back your adversaries. Whatever your adversaries are. It might be other people, might be states of mind, might be addictive cravings. The problems that plagued you in addiction, the 100 attackers, so to speak, like this verse mentions, will run away from the new you as you put God's strength into the fight. And there's also an interesting interpretation of the numbers involved in this verse. If you're interested in math, you'll notice that the first part of the verse says that 5 Israelites can beat 100 enemies, meaning it's a 1 to 20 ratio. Okay, but 100 can beat 10,000. That's 100-fold. So it's 100 Israelites together is 5 times more powerful than 5 Israelites together. So what does this mean? So one interpretation is that the more the Israelites come together, the greater their combined strength. And we find this in the program too. When we come together, the bigger the group, the more committed to fellowship, the greater the power of recovery. Leviticus 26:14-16 says, "But if you will not listen to me and will not perform all these commandments, if you consider my decrees loathsome, and if your being rejects my ordinances, so as not to perform all my commandments, so that you annul my covenant, then I will do the same to you. I will assign upon you panic, swelling lesions, and burning fever, which causes eyes to long and souls to suffer. You will sow your seeds in vain, for your enemies will eat it." This is a challenging verse because not everyone believes in the idea of a jealous God, a God that will turn his attention against you if you turn away from him. Whatever you believe, however, there is a basic truth in this verse, which is that those who turn away from God in recovery invariably find themselves struggling against serious difficulties. It's not God's fault if we make bad decisions. It's our fault. Panic, but listen to the description of what happens. Panic, eyes that long, souls that suffer, fever. Sounds like a relapse, right? Sowing your seeds in vain with your enemies eating what you plant. Again, that describes how life goes when you start picking up again and leave the rooms. It's scary, of course, but the verse also supplies the answer to the solution to the problem. God says, if you will not listen to me. So the opposite is also true. If you listen to God, you'll have a good shot at avoiding these outcomes. Sometimes it can be hard to hear God's voice, though, even when we read it right off the page of the Bible. The challenge is to quiet ourselves down until we can perceive the soft but all-important message we are meant to be receiving. Leviticus 26:19 continues with this warning. God says, "I will break the pride of your might. I will make your heavens like iron and your land like copper." So this is a continued warning of what will happen to the Israelites if they ignore God's laws in the land that he is giving them. God will break the pride of your might. In recovery, there's a concept known as self-will run riot. If we believe that our own strength and abilities are enough to save us from drugs and alcohol, let alone all of life's difficulties, we're probably heading for disaster. God's will is what matters. It can be tricky to make this work, of course. We need to believe in ourselves to be successful in recovery. Yet, we have to temper that belief in ourselves with a faith in God. Trying to go it alone, fueled only by ego and self-will, we will likely to find our lives to be like copper, like a copper field, yielding nothing.
You've been listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible. www.foriwillbewithyou.com